future. 100 years after the birth of Nelson Mandela, the South African Reserve Bank issues commemorative banknotes and a 5-rand coin to mark the anniversary. Africa 54 starts right now.
Hello and welcome to Africa 54. It's the show that goes around the continent to bring stories near and far. I'm Chamberlain Oso at Channels Television here in Lagos. I'm joined by Vincent Makori at Voice of America in Washington.
Well, thanks a lot. I'm Vincent Makori at our global headquarters in Washington, D.C. Happy to be with you again for another edition of Africa 54. Let's start off with a look at how Nigeria's lawmakers engage with the people. Chamberlain Oso in Lagos brings you that story.
Well, yes, the National Assembly is seeking to promote transparency and public participation in the legislation process. At its first ever open week, the federal lawmakers want Nigerians to be more informed about the functions of Parliament, hoping that such engagements will bridge the gap between the legislature and the public. Channels Television's correspondent Linda Kigbe reports.
Nigerians repeatedly demand for openness and accountability from the National Assembly, and they want lawmakers to engage with their constituents on a regular basis.
Currently, it's at discretion of members to visit their constituency and interact with the people, most times for the purposes of re-election. But for the purposes of representation, we must make sure that members and senators have a certain week or days they visit their constituency and compulsorily interact with the people and present their scorecards.
We need a lot of openness in the areas of budgeting, accountability.
I expect to see a Nigeria where citizens are interested about budgetary allocations for developments in their places, doing a follow-up, possibly quizzing their legislators, and where they cannot answer to their questions, suing even for a recall.
The National Assembly maintains that it is ready to engage more with the public, and this is perhaps the driving force behind the first ever National Assembly Open Week. The Parliament opened its doors to a cross-section of Nigerians to discuss the workings of Parliament as well as pertinent national issues.
We hope through this process that we'll be able to understand our role and our responsibility. We will understand the work that we do, the bills that we pass, the process that it takes, and all the procedures and processes that are required.
But the Speaker of the House of Representatives wants openness and cooperation to extend the relationship between the executive and the legislature.
May I also use this opportunity to call on other arms of government, particularly the executive branch, to open its doors and activities to the legislative scrutiny. Legislative oversight and scrutiny is very critical to government or to good governance.
Years of military rule, which truncated democracy, effectively rendered the legislature the least developed arm of government. Lawmakers themselves admit that many Nigerians are not educated on the role of the legislature. Therefore, the Parliament has its work cut out for it in deepening the understanding of the public on the responsibilities of the National Assembly. Linda Akibi, Channels Television News.
In addition to creating internal laws, Nigeria's National Assembly has the responsibility of domesticating international treaties before they become law. Nigeria is a signatory to a number of such agreements, but many of them are yet to be domesticated years after being signed. Some legal experts believe this is a disservice to Nigeria and other signatories, especially considering the benefits of some of such international legal instruments. Benson Olugbo, a legal practitioner, joins us from our studios in Abuja to shed some light on this matter. Welcome to the program. Let's start by asking you, what would you say is the attitude of African states towards international treaties?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag. So you have different countries applying different rules of engagement. And it also depends on the provisions of the Constitution. So for some countries, they apply the monist system where international instruments that are signed automatically becomes part of their national law. But for other countries like Nigeria, it's basically an executive act to go and ratify or sign an instrument. But before you can have the force of law, you need to enact it into a national legislation as provided under Section 12 of the Nigerian Constitution. So what we have seen actually is that most African countries, not all of them per se, interestingly sign and ratify these instruments, but really don't do much to implement it in the national law. And I think that's a big problem.
Now, talk to us about this, because this debate usually comes up about whether or not international law takes precedence over a national law. In principle, it does, but in reality, there's still a gap. What do signatory states lose by not integrating international law into their domestic ones?
That you have signed and ratified an instrument or a treaty and is not part of our national law means that you cannot actually go to a Nigerian court and request to be protected by that international treaty. So you still require the National Assembly to pass an implementing legislation, which now gives that treaty or protocol or convention a Nigerian flavor, if we may use that language.
All right. What would you suggest would be a better way to handle international agreements, considering the nature of the country's legal system?
Well, there are two ways here. Since we follow the dualist system, I think it is important the executive who currently goes through the process of treaty ratification to carry Nigerians along when these treaties are being ratified abroad. Secondly, I think it also behoves on the government, because most of these actually let it lie there. There is need to ensure that an implementing legislation is sent as soon as possible to the National Assembly. And of course, through the process of the first reading and second reading and then the public hearing, Nigerians are made aware of the importance or otherwise of such a law and the need for us to engage with it, criticize it, and ensure that what comes out at the end of the day will make Nigeria a better place.
Interesting place to let it go. Mr. Benson Olugbo, thank you for joining us today on Africa 54.
Thank you very much.
And the stories we cover. You can join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Now, coming up, a project in rural areas of Kaduna State aims to bring safer water to over 1 million households.